consolidated financial statement or consolidation, Ind AS 110. Yesterday, we have already discussed Ind AS 103, which is business combinations. So that is a replica or a standard, not replica, but a standard which has to be compared with AS 14 of Indian GAAP. And here we are discussing consolidation, how to do consolidation, what are the parameters of consolidation first of all, and what is the, how do you consolidate joint ventures and associates. Okay. The basic fundamental guidance what has been provided under this standard is what is control, and they have given a much wider definition under this standard as compared to what you had it under your Indian GAAP. So here they are given much wider definition and what is the significance of such control and how will it create an impact or how will it differ or how will it differentiate your CFS as it appears under Ind AS and how it was appearing under Indian GAAP. Previously, under Indian GAAP, you had a standard rules. If the shareholding is exceeding 50%, you have to consolidate. If you are controlling the composition of board of directors, you have to consolidate. There were certain standard principles given under the Indian GAAP. Whereas here, you have been given guidance based on conditions. If these conditions are getting fulfilled, only then you are controlling the entity and only then you have to consolidate the entity in your books of accounts. If these conditions are not getting fulfilled, then you are not controlling the entity. So moving ahead with what are the conditions given? For the purpose of consolidation, first is you should have a power over the entity. There should be variability of returns, and using that power, you can differ or you can change this variability of returns. By this pure means, you don't understand anything. I will give you examples, and based on examples, your concept has to be built into what is different under the standard. So, first of all, what you have to decide is, for whatever purpose the entity is created, who is deciding or who is the main decision maker for those activities. So, for example, if the entity is built up for manufacturing activities, so who is deciding how to allocate the resources? Who is deciding timing of manufacture? Who is deciding how much to manufacture? Which entity or who is having control over this relevant decisions? So whoever is having the power over this relevant decisions have to be identified. Now I'll take examples. So somewhere I'll take common examples and somewhere I'll take difficult or uncommon cases. But this is relevant for the purpose of understanding the concept. Now, purpose of entities sometimes might be very simple, but in some cases, it might be very much difficult. For example, today I'm ABC, a sponsoring bank, and I have created an investment entity, which is XYZ. Now, the purpose of this investment entity is to invest into bonds of certain companies. Now, when the purpose of the entity is to invest into bonds of the companies, in the contract itself, in certain arrangement, I have specified that sponsoring bank has selected certain bonds and XYZ can invest into only such bonds. Okay. Now, in these cases, the sponsoring bank, whether it is shareholder of XYZ or not a shareholder of XYZ, the main activity or the main relevant activity of XYZ has been controlled by the sponsoring bank. So the sponsoring bank has the power to decide which bonds XYZ should invest into and which bonds XYZ should not invest into. So since your purpose of this investment entity is purely to invest into the bonds, you have to decide who has the power to decide which bonds to invest into, who has the power to sell off certain bonds, who has the power to invest into new bonds. So whatever are the relevant activities of the entity or whatever is the purpose of the entity, you have to decide who has power to decide or to control such relevant activities. This is the first part. Now, in such cases, relevant activity that you have discussed, the bond selection process, it can be different. Now, the main motto or the main principle behind this standard also you remember is, as a standard rule, whoever holds more than 50% in any particular entity controls that entity. But the standard says that it might not always be that case. In certain cases, even if you're not controlling 50%, even if you're not holding 50% of the shares, You might control the entity, and other way around is also possible. You are controlling more than 50% of the shares, but still the control is not possible. So here we'll discuss examples for all such cases. Now another example. I am XYZ Limited. I am holding 45% shares of PQR Limited. However, I am having power to appoint all the board of directors of PQR Limited. So all the board of directors of PQR has to be appointed by XYZ Limited. The contract, they have developed a contract which says that if you have to sell more than 50% of the shares, 50% of the assets of the company, only in such case you have to go back to the shareholders. Now tell me, in such cases, is XYZ controlling PQR? As per Indian GAAP, since XYZ is not holding more than 50%, it used to not control PQR. But over here, XYZ is having the power to appoint all of the members of the BOD. And since it has the power to appoint all the BOD, it is indirectly controlling the PQR, since all the activities of PQR are being controlled by the board of directors. The clause of more than 50% is just a protective clause, so that the board of directors do not get up and sell the entire company. So in cases you're selling more than 50% of the assets, only in that cases you have to come back to the shareholders. That is one of the case in the case that we're discussing. Second example is of a casting vote. What relevance does it make? XYZ is holding 50% in PQR. The directors are XYZ has 4 directors. The bank has appointed 2 directors, and there is a seed investor who has appointed 2 directors in the company. However, in cases where there is a tie, in that cases, the director of XYZ Limited has a casting vote, and he can exercise a casting vote. Now, in these cases, even if XYZ is holding only 50%, but in all relevant activities, XYZ has a additional say. So in such cases, it can result into XYZ is controlling PQR even if it is not holding more than 50%. This is one of the case. So in short, what the concept of control says is, don't go purely by way of exact shareholding in the company. Go by way of what are the relevant activities of the company, who is having power to direct such relevant activities, and because of such relevant activities, your returns should vary, and you can use this power to vary the returns. You have to just look into who has the power and whether he is able to use such power to vary the returns of the company. We'll see the second example, option to purchase. Now we'll discuss the example over here. There is a shareholder XYZ. Presently, he is holding only 45% in a specialized company named J. But XYZ has an option to purchase additional 55% at any point in time. So at any point in time, XYZ can exercise the option and he can subscribe to additional 55% shares of company J. Now, purely if these were the terms of the contract, what would have you done? Since XYZ has an option to exercise the shares, you will decide or you will see whether the option is in the money option or it is out of the money option. What does it mean? We have discussed this concept yesterday in the financial instruments. In the money option means what? XYZ, XYZ is in a favorable position to exercise that options. So for example, if the book value of company is say 10 rupees, but I have option to subscribe to the shares at rupees 8. So in such cases, XYZ will decide whether it is favorable to subscribe at rupees 8. And if it is in a financially better position, then our option is in the money option. In the money means what? It is a beneficial option. However, there can be a case where option is out of the money. What does it mean? If the market price of XZ Limited is 100 rupees, but you have option to subscribe the shares at rupees 150, will logically you subscribe to the shares? In market you are getting it at 100 rupees, and here because of your option you are getting it at 150 rupees. It is nowhere logical, and because of that it is not financially feasible, and accordingly your option is out of the money option, and in such cases your option is not having any value. So if purely these were the terms of the contract, that you have option to exercise the number of shares and it is in the money option, in that cases, even if presently XYZ is holding only 45% of shares, but since XYZ has a in the money option, indirectly what is happening is XYZ is controlling Z Limited. But let's move on to the second clauses of the contract. The contract says that, or the position of the company is such that if XYZ exercises its option, all the directors of the company, whoever are having specialized knowledge of the company, will leave the organization. So that is the situation of the company. Now really tell me, is it beneficial or will XYZ really exercise that option? As soon as XYZ exercises its option, all the directors having the technical knowledge will leave the organization. So in short, because of this nature, the option of the XYZ will never be exercised, and accordingly XYZ is not controlling Z Limited because of this clause. Okay, moving ahead to next example. XYZ, continuing the same example, XYZ is having 45% in J Limited. XYZ is having option to buy 55% additional shares, but XYZ is too much into financial trouble. XYZ is not having that much financial ability itself to buy additional 55% shares. It is not having that much net worth itself. So accordingly, in such cases, since XYZ is not having the financial ability to subscribe to such 55% additional shares, the option is not a valid option, and accordingly XYZ is not controlling Z Limited. Okay, and we have discussed in the money and out of the money option. Now, moving ahead to the next part. This is again a practical case. You will find out also this case in listed companies. Now, I have invested 55% in PQR Limited. Okay. Now, by normal 55%, you would say that XYZ is controlling PQR. But I have developed a separate shareholding agreement, and as per that shareholding agreement, I will not exercise any voting rights with respect to this 55% shares. And this is a practical case. If you will see a company called as Kirloskar Brothers Limited, and this is mentioned in the annual report, Kirloskar Brothers holds 20% in Kirloskar Industries Limited, but they have developed a shareholding agreement based on which Kirloskar Brothers have said that we will never exercise this 22% shares. Now, in such cases, if you go purely by the shareholding, Kirloskar Brothers is associate of Kirloskar Industries Limited. But since there is an agreement that they will never exercise this voting rights, the company is not an associate of the Kirloskar Brothers Limited. So that is why this, even if you are holding shares, this shareholding agreement has negated this voting rights. So this is mainly about the conditions. So this standard indirectly says that don't only go based on the shareholding, see other relevant factors, see what is the substance of the arrangement, and see in substance who is controlling the entire entity. We'll see another example of de facto control. What does this mean is, if I have only 45% shares in one company, but the rest 55% are so much dispersed into various parts that none of the person can come up and individually control the company. So even a single person is not holding more than 1% shares. So in such cases, what to do? In such cases, you have a de facto control. What does it mean is, none of the other shareholders, none of the other 55% can come together and vote against this 45% because they are very much dispersed in nature. Everybody is holding 0.1, 0.5% of the shares, and I am holding 45% of the shares. So in such cases, in spite of not holding more than 50% of the shares, still there might be a case where you are controlling the company. So this is about how to decide whether you are controlling the company or not, and what are the parameters given for the control. Moving ahead to the next part is, what is the significant influence? So similarly over here, the definition of significant influence is given. If you are holding 20% of shares, more than 20% of the shares, you might have a significant influence over the company. But this significant influence can be, you might have a reputable presumption that in spite of holding more than 20%, you are not having a significant influence over the company. And the factors such as representation on the board of directors, decision making, how did the material transactions are taking place, how there is change of managerial personnel, these factors will decide whether you are having a significant influence over the company or not. So these are the cases over for the significant influence. And then we have a concept of joint control. Ind AS 111 has defined what is a joint arrangement, what is a joint control, and how do you account for such joint arrangements. Now they have given certain criteria how to define these concepts. Wherever you have joint control, you have to divide such entities into whether it is a joint arrangement or whether it is a joint venture. So wherever it is a joint venture, you have to consolidate it in a consolidated financial statements. But in cases where it is a joint arrangement only, in such cases, you will combine it in your standalone financial statements itself. You don't have to include it in your CFS, but it will be a part of your SFS itself. So they have given parameters about how to decide which is a joint venture and which is a joint arrangement. So these are the parameters given by the standard. One of the most important parameter is the legal form of the entity. If legal form of the entity is such that if you cannot have a distinct legal, you cannot establish a distinct legal entity, in such cases it is by default a joint arrangement and it will be included in your standalone financial statements itself. Whereas in cases where you can establish a different legal form of that entity, in such cases it is a joint control. And the standard has specifically said that a partnership firm cannot be said as having a different legal entity because the partners are no longer separate from the partnership firm. So in cases where the company is invested into a partnership firm, by default it is a joint arrangement and it will be a part of the same standalone financial statements itself, and you don't have to include in the CFS. It will be a part of SFS itself and don't wait until the CFS. Now, another parameter is under Indian GAAP, you had a different method of accounting. For the purpose of joint ventures, you used to do a proportionate consolidation. Whereas under Ind AS, for the associate as well as joint ventures, you have to do equity accounting. So whatever equity accounting is similar to what you used to do for an associate, same you have to do under for the joint venture, and there is no concept of proportionate accounting. So how do you do equity accounting under the standard is, whatever is your initial cost of the investment, add up your share in the comprehensive income. So if you're holding say 25% of the total comprehensive income, you will add up 25% of the company in which you have invested, less any dividends paid, that will be your carrying amount. And this concept is applicable to the joint venture as well as the associates. So in your consolidated financial statements, wherever you have a joint venture, first you have to deconsolidate that joint venture from your company, and then you have to equity account for that joint venture into your books of accounts. This is a bigger change due to which your consolidated financial statements can change to a significant extent. Because in proportionate consolidation method, you used to take your proportionate share in each and every item and accordingly used to consolidate. If property, plant and equipment is amounting to rupees 100, you used to add up 50 rupees to your property, plant and equipment. If your total assets are 1000, you should add up 500 to your total assets. And this is what will significantly change because a bigger chunk will be removed from your financial statements and it will be just a equity accounting. So in equity accounting, your nothing changes, just your investment value keeps on increasing on a periodic basis. As soon as the entity earns profit, your investment value keeps on increasing. This is again a bigger change between Indian GAAP and Ind AS. Second important concept is, this concept is linked to whatever we had discussed in Ind AS 103, which is business combinations. Any entity, if today I'm investing into a particular entity and on account of my investment, I have gained a control over that entity. Okay, if I've gained a control over the entity, in such cases, how do I consolidate? I consolidate and calculate goodwill based on the fair value of the assets and liabilities acquired. So previously under Indian GAAP, the consolidation was not based on the principle of fair value. It was purely the book values of the subsidiary company that were consolidated in the consolidated financial statements. So we used to take holding company's book value, subsidiaries company's book values, and add up. But in case of Ind AS, you have to take the fair values of the assets and liabilities acquired, and based on this fair values, you will gonna compute the goodwill amount. Now you will ask a question: what happens if for the old subsidiaries which have been already acquired? This concept was also discussed yesterday. You have an exemption in Ind AS 101 that you do not restate any business combinations that have already occurred in the past. So if already there is a subsidiary, this entity was my subsidiary before transiting into Ind AS, in such cases, you will not change anything for such subsidiary companies, and whatever consolidation method is going on as per your previous GAAP, that will be continued same for the future periods, and your goodwill will be at the same amount. Whereas if today, after transiting into Ind AS, you acquire a particular control on any particular subsidiary company, in such cases that consolidation has to be made based on the fair values of the assets and liabilities acquired, and based on these fair values you are going to compute the goodwill amount. Another case that we discussed yesterday is this goodwill amount won't be amortized. Whatever goodwill arises on consolidation is never amortized, and it is only tested for impairment. Now moving ahead to the next part is, before discussing the standalone financial statements, one more part we will discuss is, what if you withdraw a certain portion of your shares, or what if you gain certain additional stake in the company? For example, I'll just discuss this by way of an example, writing it over here. Today I'm having 60% in any particular company. Okay, I'm holding 60% of company XYZ. Now, when I'm acquiring the 60% in company XYZ, my goodwill amount was rupees 10 lakhs. Okay. Now, what happened in next year? I acquired additional 20% in this company. The fair value of net assets for this 20% was say rupees 5 lakhs. Okay. And I paid amount of rupees 7 lakhs for this 20% share. Okay. Now, under Indian GAAP, you used to recognize additional goodwill of rupees 2 lakh. So this was your additional goodwill amount, since you have paid more than the fair value of the net assets. Whereas under Ind AS, there is a different concept. What does Ind AS say is, you see what has happened to your control. Now over here, previously also you were controlling the entity, and after this additional stake also you are only controlling the entity. If there is no change in the control happened, in that cases you will never recognize additional goodwill. So your goodwill amount will be fixed to rupees 10 lakh, and there will be no change in the amount of goodwill. So what will happen to this additional amount paid? This additional amount paid will be adjusted in your reserves, and there will be no additional goodwill created. This amount will be debited to your reserves and surpluses. So this is again a bigger change. Whichever companies will be transiting from Indian GAAP to Ind AS, this will be a bigger change for such kind of companies. That is the additional stake acquired. For such additional stake, there will never be any kind of additional goodwill into the company. Moving ahead to the standalone financial statements. In the standalone financial statements, as per Ind AS 27, you have option to recognize the investment in the associate or joint venture or subsidiary. For such investments, you have two options. The first option is to recognize such investment at cost, or the second option is to recognize such investments in accordance with Ind AS 109. So Ind AS 109 is nothing but the financial instrument standard. So that is, in such cases, you will fair value that investments through the statement of profit and loss. If you are using the option given under Ind AS 109, every disclosure measurement requirements will be as per the Ind AS 109. But if you are using the option of cost, Ind AS 109 will not be applicable to such kind of companies and to such kind of investments. And these investments will be carried at cost itself. No disclosures, none of the requirements of Ind AS 109 will be applicable. Either classification, measurement, or disclosures, none of these concepts of Ind AS 109 will be applicable to the company. So please remember this concept. Many people raise a query that it is an investment, it is an equity instrument. So why doesn't it fall under Ind AS 109? This is because there is a scope exclusion from Ind AS 27 that if you're deciding or if you're taking an option to measure at cost, in such cases, the concept or the principle of 109 is not applicable and you're completely removed out of that standard. I hope it is clear to you all. And now quickly we'll revise what are the differences between the previous standard, the previous consolidation standard and the new standard. So previously, under your previous Indian GAAP consolidation standard, you had only strict principles of consolidation. Over here, you have a rule for consolidation, that is power over the entity, variability of returns, and usage of this power to decide the variability of the return. This is one change. That is why there are many companies which will come under the scope of consolidation. There are many companies which will be removed out of the scope of consolidation. Second difference is the goodwill. Goodwill is never tested for impairment. So accordingly, goodwill on consolidation will also be never tested for impairment. The third case is the case that we discussed right now. If there is increase in control, if there is additional control gained over the company, in such cases, under Indian GAAP previously you used to recognize additional goodwill, and under Ind AS, if there is no change in control, you won't recognize any additional goodwill in the financial statements and will purely be as it is, how it was appearing earlier. Fourth difference is, under Indian GAAP, the joint ventures were proportionately consolidated in the books of accounts, whereas under Ind AS, there will be equity accounting method and there won't be any kind of proportionate consolidation. Now, one more concept that I want to just quickly link to this standard is, we discussed certain deferred tax implications. Now, here we are discussing how you are equity accounting it. So for every equity accounting concept, there will be a deferred tax which will arise in the books of accounts, which we discussed on day 3. Whichever participants were there on day 3, please try to link this consolidation method and the deferred tax concept for this, and accordingly you will realize whatever we had discussed in day 3. So in associate or in equity accounting, to whatever amount your investment value has increased, so here you added your share of comprehensive income. Due to this addition of share of comprehensive income, there will be a deferred tax liability which will be arising in your books of accounts, and based on the conditions mentioned in the standard of Ind AS 12, that is income taxes, you will decide whether deferred tax liability has to be recognized on this or it has not to be recognized on this component. So here we are linking the deferred taxes standard also. So today in this consolidated financial statements, we have discussed or we have linked Ind AS 38, we have linked Ind AS 103, we have also linked Ind AS 12, that is deferred taxes, we have linked Ind AS 27, that is standalone financial statements. There are various linkages to this standard. I hope it is clear to you all. In case of any queries, we'll discuss the queries right now and you can post on to your queries. So we'll discuss one by one each and every. I hope every concept is clear. In case any of the queries you have not raised right now, you can email it to me also. I've already given my email IDs. I'll give it to you again. So my email ID is I've noted it in the Excel sheet mentioned to you over here. So this is my email ID and this is my mobile number. So you can either WhatsApp me the queries or email me the queries. Email is better because you can reply to it immediately. So you can note down on from the screen my email ID and the mobile number. If you have not posted these queries, then we can discuss these queries later on also. Let's cover whatever are the queries raised. And thereafter, just for a quick feedback, I will share with you certain Google forms based on which you can give me feedback that what should be covered additionally or whatever are your feedback based on various concepts. So this I will raise either today or tomorrow, and accordingly I will give that Google form to each one of you. We have also created WhatsApp groups. I request all of you, we have created WhatsApp groups for each and every day. So whoever participants are participating on that particular day, we have raised a WhatsApp group. So people raise queries on that WhatsApp groups. We solve queries on that group. We give the PPTs on that group. So the participants are requested to join that WhatsApp group also. The link might have already been shared. So we'll discuss the queries one by one. Just a moment. In CFS of accounts, if we have 60% in a subsidiary and subsidiary is having losses, what is the treatment for losses in case of CFS and for non-controlling interest? Good question. In Ind AS, you allocate the share of losses to the non-controlling interest even if there are losses to the company. And even if the balance of non-controlling interest is resulting into a negative balance. So the losses of the subsidiary company are allocated to the non-controlling interest even if the balance is resulting into a negative balance. This is answer to your question, Deepak Lohia. Then secondly, one more linking concept is under Ind AS, you club NCI as a part of your equity. So your non-controlling interest is disclosed under the equity component. And whoever were there on day one, we have discussed statement of changes in equity. So even in this statement of changes in equity, non-controlling interest will form a part. So you have to show a reconciliation between this non-controlling interest. That is, you have to show opening balance of non-controlling interest, gains and losses allocated to the NCI, any changes in NCI, and then the closing balance. This you have to give for the current year and the comparative year. Second question is, can you Excel sheet? Okay, we'll share up. In spite of holding more than 20% in an entity, the shareholder does not have representation in board, do not take part in decision making or exercise any sort of control. How will investment be shown in financial statement? Now, please understand, if I'm having a shares more than 20%, okay, but there is no shareholding agreement which is restricting my rights given in my shares, in that cases, it is your subsidiary, it is your associate, in spite of the fact that you are not taking part in any of the board meetings. Why it is such that you are given a right, you are exercising or not exercising the right, that's a different case. But since you have the right in that cases, your right is not restricted by any other agreement, still it is your associate company because you have the right. It is getting exercised or not, that's a different question. In consolidation, if holding company has pledged significant amount of shares of subsidiary and in case where it is probable that bank would sell such cases, since holding company is not financially healthy, would it affect my consolidation? Unless such sale of shares happen, until and unless there will be no impact on consolidation. Second is under Ind AS 115, if my business is of NBFC and during the period I incurred marketing cost, including salary of my marketing team, normally all loans financed, I need to capitalize. No. There is no capitalization required in the to the tenure of the loan. This is not the case. So Gokul, Mr. Gokul, this is the answer to your question. There is no capitalization of this cost required into your loan amounts. Then where to recognize revenue under CIF terms? Now terms of the contracts, this is purely clear. This was same under the Indian GAAP also. If there are CIF terms of contract, you will recognize the revenue only when the goods reach the customer's location. Until and unless you won't recognize the revenue in such cases. When the revenue is recognized for builder and developer, it's possible for project completion contract. This is a classic case wherever you have sale of flats. Now it depends upon the terms of the contract, but in majority of the cases when revenue recognition was applied on the first time in India, wherever there is sale of retail flats, in such cases the revenue recognition model had come down from over the period of time to at point in time. Now each and every builder who is having sale of flats, now you see DLF company, they are recognizing revenue at point in time for their sale of flats. Why is it so? Because none of the three conditions of the over period of time of revenue are getting satisfied in such cases. Because for the third condition also to be satisfied, if the contract is cancelled in between, you should be reimbursed with cost plus margin, which doesn't happen. And in many cases, you don't have a customer itself until the project is entirely completed. So in many cases, the for the builders who are selling the retail flats, the revenue recognition has changed from over the period of time to at point on time. This is a very big change and it has impacted to the companies in a very bigger manner. Again, one more thing, previously under Indian GAAP, you had a specific guidance note for revenue recognition for such construction companies. But under Ind AS, you don't have a separate guidance note, and Ind AS 115 itself is applicable to such kind of companies. Then, next question we'll discuss. The value bifurcation as per 115 and also the timing of recognition may not match with the GST law of the valuation or time of supply or the definition. Yeah, it is true. GST law is separate and your financials are separate. So you have to apply GST concepts for the GST purposes, and then in your GST audit report, you will give a reconciliation between the revenue what is appearing in your P&L and what revenue you have shown for the financial purpose. That is very true. Consideration payable, I discussed it later on. I hope I've addressed every query. If there is a past trend of bad dates and cash discounts, how will this impact revenue from operations? Cash discounts will be netted off against revenue from operations, whereas bad dates won't be netted off against revenue from operations, because bad dates is not a variable consideration. It will be debited to your P&L account itself and it will be debited to the other expenses component. And again, one more thing, you have to apply Ind AS 109 to compute the bad dates. It is called as expected credit loss model under Ind AS. So if you're there yesterday, you would understand what is expected credit loss. If you're not there yesterday, then you have to refer the concept under Ind AS 109. So over here, another question is Ind AS 10115. Do you mean 100% of variable consideration will be netted off against revenue? Yeah, 100% of your variable consideration will be netted off against revenue. So in this new standard, you just compare the annual reports. There are various companies whose top line has reduced due to this concept of netting it off against the revenue from operations. And the last question is early completion bonus. Early completion bonus, it does not hamper the prudence concept because the standard itself says that based on a past trend, you are estimating the early completion bonus. So prudence concept does not impact over here because you're using the past trend to establish how much bonus you're going to receive. So this is all about, we have discussed the queries also, and it was very good session with you all. The queries were also very intelligent queries. And please, why we are discussing this Ind AS is, it will be very helpful for you all to discuss all these concepts. So even if you are not getting an implementation assignment, you might get certain review assignments. So you might have various friends who are having Ind AS companies and they are not knowing Ind AS. Even today in Pune, there are so many people who are not well versed of Ind AS. So in that cases, if you're getting a good handholding over Ind AS, you can review the financial statements of the company. So out of 100 CAs, if there are 5 CAs who are aware about Ind AS, at least you can review the work of what these 100 CAs are certifying. Because period on period, many companies are coming into the Ind AS regime. So in my past experience of 4 years, today I have such a huge experience that even by looking into the financial statements of the company, I can identify what are the errors and in what form they have not complied with the Ind AS and what they should have done. So these financial statements are published in ROC, are published in annual reports. There are some listed companies. Many companies can point out the errors what you are making in such Ind AS financial statements, because many errors are very evitable errors. So when you're certifying or when you're auditing a Ind AS financial statements, it is very important that you know such concepts. And we have seen big listed companies who make such mistakes in their financial statements. And these mistakes are very evident from the financial statements that they have not applied this Ind AS concept. That is why I'm trying to cover at least the major concepts which are applicable to the company. So after attending this session of 5 to 6 days, I would be at least happy if you can apply these common concepts in your Ind AS financial statements, or at least you know these differences. Once you know these differences, what I would like you to do is take up a particular annual report under Indian GAAP. You yourself list down the differences, what are there as compared to the Indian GAAP, and then refer to its Ind AS annual report and just compare whether you are able to identify all the differences between the Indian GAAP and the Ind AS. So if you can do this exercise at least for 2 to 3 annual reports, it would be very happy for me also that you were able to identify the differences between the Indian GAAP and Ind AS, and you knew what had to be done for these kind of adjustments. And even in that cases, if you have any queries, you can at any time come back to me. I have already given you my email IDs and my mobile numbers. So it was good session with you all, and over to you.